to new beginnings.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Penguin episode 4, Cent'anni, which means, I think, 100 years. Before we get to this episode of the show, I do want to read this comment from Isaac over at decodingtv.com. You can always become a paid subscriber at decodingtv.com, support this podcast, get access to ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and occasional bonus episodes. Isaac writes in, enjoy the discussion about the end of the episode where Oz tries to tell Sofia he's got her back before almost immediately betraying her. There's another great moment like that in the restaurant where Oz tells the waiter not to cut off Vic when he's stuttering. Later, Oz contradicts this by cutting Vic off when he's stuttering while trying to explain himself in the bathroom. Just a nice piece of character building that shows that even with Vic, probably his closest quote-unquote friend, besides maybe Eve, Oz will always put himself first when he feels cornered and let his impulses take over. End quote. Anyway, I think that's a great sort of bit of character building that we saw at the end of last week's episode. But yeah, Patrick Klepek, let's talk about episode 4. What did you think of this episode of The Penguin?
I'm glad this show recognizes the most interesting character in it. I feel like at this point we are watching the origin story of a supervillain. I didn't think it's a show called The Penguin, and I think we're trending towards a show that is actually about someone else entirely. And I have to admit, I think it will be the more interesting show because of it. And this was an incredible episode, top to bottom. Like this, it really went into a different gear with this episode. And if it can maintain that throughout, I think we might be in for something pretty special.
This is one of the most incredible television episodes of the year that I've seen, in my opinion. Now, I don't know if it's going to be able to maintain that throughout because that feels like physically impossible. I mean, the episode looks like it cost $30 million. Like, I don't even know how they achieved, because there's just like in terms of like locations, like physical locations, this looks like there's like 8 different sets that they made just for this episode. So it looks incredible. There's multiple iconic moments in the episode. Super clever stuff that they're doing with the storytelling of the show. The first 3 episodes, I've been like, the show is okay, you know, like it has some nice moments. I love Colin Farrell and Kristen Milioti, what they're doing. But you know, like, but it's kind of silly sometimes, like with the whole planting the knife on the person and all the little like plot things like that have been like pretty goofy. And this episode goes so hard that I'm like, I am locked in now. Like I am you have sold me. Like if the rest of the show is garbage, doesn't matter. You have earned enough credit for me from this episode that I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm locked in for the rest of the show, you know?
And I just, for a show that felt at times pretty formulaic, it is a tossed, like, I'm not even sure where the show is going anymore, right? Like, it's why I, commented early on, like, I'm so glad the show recognized, like, we want these 2 characters in a room together, and it turns out this is going to be a buddy, like, sort of like a violent buddy comedy before they turn against each other, and one of them dies at the end. Like, it's like, I see the story in front of me, and they recognize they have these incredible performers, and they're gonna let them cook, and like, that's probably a pretty good show, but not something special.
That's what we thought it would be. That's what we thought. Yes. And then, but then
we pulled the ripcord early. There's a lot of show left. Like, again, multiple times I'm like, we have the finale of a different show on episode 4. Like, where do we go from here? And that's really surprising and exciting.
Exciting, because I agree. In my mind, I was like, they're gonna team up, and then like in episode like 6 or 7, she's gonna find out that Oz killed her brother, right? Like, that's what it's gonna. And then there's gonna be a big confrontation and a climax,
and she gets like shot, and like she's bleeding out, and he grabs her, and he says something like really touching as he says goodbye. But then he gets up, and he's Oz. He doesn't care about anyone. He's like, time to take over Gotham, and then he walks off, and there's snow because the next Batman movie is supposed to be like set in the winter, and like, okay, I see where we're going.
Yeah,
and now I don't see where we're going except a lot of violence and a show that has a proper co-lead. It is like not a companion character. This show is as much hers as it is his, and that is just a fundamentally more interesting show than I thought we were getting when I started watching a show called The Penguin.
I like how you and I are like trying to break the story beats of the show, live on the podcast. And obviously, I think the lesson here is, why didn't the writers of the Penguin hire us? Like, we clearly had the best
Right here.
ideas
Right here.
for the show. Like, that's their loss. Their loss. Decoding TV podcast game. So let's dive into what actually happened in the show. The episode opens by showing the closing events of last episode from the perspective of Sofia. We see Oz abandon her, and somehow Sofia gets away from the Maronis and collapses like next to a building on a pile of newspapers. Don't know how she got away, but whatever.
Don't worry about it.
Let's accept that it happens. Let's accept that it happened. All right. Ironically, actually, this episode and also Agatha all along this week both showed events that we've already seen from that show depicted from a different perspective, separate from the flashback even that I was talking about earlier. So, but yeah, I thought that I'm always like interested to see that stuff. It's always like cool to see like what camera angles are they going to choose, and like how are they going to edit it differently than what we saw before. So I thought that was kind of nice. But anyway, any thoughts on the opening before we get into the show?
Well, I just think they sell the betrayal really well. Like the way the camera locks in on her face, the way that she uses her face to really sell the betrayal. Like you feel it in the moment, right? We talked about like, wow, this like whiplash. Like, even though the whole show is about how Oz is able to sort of sell anyone out to further his own ambitions, they really sold it, like how much of a heartbreak it was in this other moment, because we haven't had a ton of. There's a lot of implications and gesturing at the history between these two in previous episodes. Now in this episode, we actually get to see some of that play out in action. But even before we get to those flashbacks and get a sense of the history of these two, that scene alone, man, she sells. She feels like she has truly been betrayed, not by someone she fully trusts, but by someone that she kind of let in. Like, she doesn't have a lot in this world. Like, and this was someone that like Oz, you're a motherfucker, but like, you're mine. Like, and I'm gonna deal with you in my own way. And maybe that's as close as she can get to love in like the complicated situation that she has, or a friend. And then I think you see in that moment, oh, the one person I even entertained that might like be on my side to some small degree, even though they screwed me over in the past. Like, maybe this is different. She watches it all shatter in front of her in an instant. Like, he does not hesitate a moment, just completely sells her down the river. And that is the moment she breaks differently. And then the rest of the episode is the moments leading up to her breaking bad in like a variety of different ways that I think helps sell this notion that I kept saying, like, well, at some point we're going to find out what kind of effed up stuff she's been up to behind the scenes, and the show's kind of playing fast and loose. Well, the truth of the matter is, I think those effed up things are coming throughout the rest of the season, and really this is, a woman who has been victimized by her family and those closest to her.
Most of this episode is told in flashback form, and I've seen a little bit of chatter about this. I mean, last episode was also largely a flashback. This episode is largely a flashback. I'm curious if there's going to be more flashbacks. And it kind of makes sense to me, because this show is a direct continuation of the Batman, right? And you cannot, like, you want to tell backstories for these characters, but you can't. It doesn't make sense for them to start the story back before the events of the Batman happen, especially in this situation where it's like years ago. I do think they could have. I think it's been like 10 years since the events that we see here. I will say the performance is incredible. Like, when you see Kristen Milioti, it's like, oh, that is a different person than she is in the modern day. It's really amazing, the transformation. Just, not even like, there's basically no makeup as far as I can tell in terms of like how her hair is different, right? But like, they don't like give her like
put her hair up instead of down, and like that's basically as far as they go to try and sell you.
They don't do any. They don't give her like gray hair in the future or anything.
Yeah, we're not gonna pretend she's 28. Like, it's like, just she's younger. It's a flashback. Use your imagination.
Yeah. But so they put like no effort into that, in my opinion. But the performance is so different that it's like remarkable. It's just like you're at no point do you question that it's like, oh yeah, that's just her from 10 years. That's her with a completely different personality in a completely different situation. Like, I bought the whole thing the entire time.
So that was trust in the actor, as opposed to a lot of the times when we have different distances in time for
Prosthetics and all
story.
this.
Yeah, there's I don't think the audience is gonna.
They used all their prosthetic budget on Colin Farrell. They're like, we're not gonna do any of that shit for Kristen Milioti. Like, it's all for Colin Farrell, and that's it.
But this is what there's probably no budget in this in the Batman television show, as big and expensive it is. But like, this is what leads movies to apply CG and like AI techniques to try and de-age people. Like, because I don't think the audience. I don't think they're smart enough to just understand it's like in the past. We've got to hit them over the head with like some advanced computer techniques. And here, whether they ever considered anything like that, I don't know. But I'm glad what they settled on was trust. We have a terrific actor that will sell the performance to convey the difference in time, and she does that immaculately.
She nails it so hard. It's incredible. It's incredible. Completely agree with you, Patrick. Great point. Anyway, before Sofia went to Arkham, she was just a woman in the Falcone family trying to raise money to help other women. After
just another rich woman benefiting from the murders of her family. Classic situation.
That old chestnut. After her mom's depression claimed her own life, like her mom killed herself. When a reporter approaches her at a charity event and claims that a recent suicide at her father's club might actually be a murder, Sofia can't stop thinking about it. She also uncovers evidence that maybe her mom didn't die of suicide after all. We see that Oz actually turns her in for speaking to that reporter, and as a result, her father frames her for the murders and gets her thrown into Arkham. All right. Shocking development. At no point, and this shows my skill with seeing what's coming and prognostication, but at no point did I actually think that the twist would be that she didn't do the murders. Now, to be fair, she did kill someone. So, like, she has the Kristen Milioti we see in the future has murdered someone. So that's like, okay. She has been hardened, and the killer vibes she's putting out are not completely out of nowhere. But she didn't do the murders for which she has been accused. And that is a massive twist. I will also say, by the way, that she's really not good at hiding her suspicions from her father. And that probably led to her downfall. She's like, I mean, I saw scratches on your arm and mom's fingernails were all messed up. And that means that maybe she was scratching you and that maybe you killed her. But what am I saying? What am I saying? It's like, come on, Sofia. Like, you gotta keep that. Some of the stuff you got to keep to yourself. You know what I mean?
It's probably the part that I didn't buy the most in an otherwise pretty incredible episode, which is you're trying to tell us she's this naive. Like, she's not 14. You know what I mean? Like, it's one, like the girl we see that finds her mother who has taken her life. Yes, I can buy that girl does not have a sense of what the family she's in, what's making all of this tick. I buy less that like this woman, like a fully fledged adult, like is this naive about the world that surrounds her. It's fine. It's one of like many things in this show that I'm fine to hand wave away in service of the things that it does really well. But like that sequence in particular, and like what you're talking about, is like
it happens twice, right?
It's like her going to the reporter, like, what are we doing? Like, you're just gonna go sit on the side of the road, like you're part of the Falcone family, like you're just like right under a bridge. I'm gonna look at all these like crime files. Like, come on, like it's a little hard to swallow.
Right. And by the way, this is somebody that her dad is thinking of making her the boss because Alberto is such an F up, right? Like,
so how am I supposed to buy that? She's meeting with a reporter on the side of the road under a bridge looking at crime photos, and he thinks that like she's ready to take over the family. Take over what? Like speeches that the family does?
Fair. A weird, some weird moments in an otherwise very strong episode, but yeah,
I didn't feel it in the moment. Like I will say, like watching the show, I'm locked in. None of this stuff is like bubbling to the surface. I'm nobody am I watching the episode going, this is bothering me. This is part of like as I'm talking about, like, now wait a second. Why would she be in charge of the family? That like she's done nothing to prove that. Like,
her brother like doesn't even know how to handle himself. Like that's made very clear.
Right. She's running these like organizations. Like she's shown competence, independence. I get that. And
then completely messes it up by making the classic rookie mistake. Accusing your father of murdering your mom.
Can't do it. Top of the list.
You cannot do it. That is the number one thing. When they tell you at business management training 101, like, don't accuse the boss of murdering your mom.
When you go to summer gangster camp, like they tell you a couple of things, and one of them is that.
So that's pretty rough, and is like the fact that she can't even contain it, she can't hide it. She does a good job. Like Kristen Milioti does a good job of selling it, but like, I was like, okay, really? Would you really like make your suspicions known to the one guy? By the way, we do have to acknowledge that they recast John Turturro from the movie, right? Like, it's Mark Strong is playing Sophia's father in the show. It was John Turturro in the movie, and I'm completely fine with it. Mark Strong is like a high enough tier actor that I literally had a moment where I'm like, was it Mark Strong that was in the Batman? Like, I literally thought to myself, like, oh yeah, that's so great that they got Mark Strong from the movie to be in the show as well.
It's been long enough. Like, that's actually, we were just talking about like, it takes so long for these productions to line up with one another. This is one of those cases where it's been long enough since I've seen the movie that I had a similar sort of revelation. Like, oh, I guess he was in that movie. What? Yeah, I suppose so. No, he wasn't. They were cast. I looked it up. They attempted to get Turturro into the show. Scheduling stuff didn't work out, so they decided rather than scrap this, like, any of the storytelling because scheduling inconveniences, let's just get another great actor, and I think the audience will like that stuff like that. Like, that is like production. Like, it's not screenwriting necessarily, but it just shows smart people showing trust in an audience. Like, this isn't like in the same way that we're not going to age down like this character. Like, just cast another great actor and put him in the character. Like, it's fine. Like, it's fine. It's just do the story. And that's another example of the show trusting its audience to just, even if they raise their hand and they're like, why isn't it this? Like, who cares? And the show moves on, and I think it's better for it.
Agreed. I think the only thing that threw me was like, I don't think of Mark Strong as like a significantly more available actor than John Turturro. You know, like, I think they're both like equal tier. If not, maybe Mark Strong even more like A-list.
They're in the same character actor.
Yeah, they're in the same.
Like, they're in everything.
Yeah,
like,
they're in the same.
He's there again.
Right. So it's like, but yes, it's probably just like a specific scheduling issue. Maybe John Turturro is making what's it called? Severance season 2 or whatever, and he's can't do it. So anyway, the thing is, what's so amazing about the episode is you realize right away, like within 5 minutes of the flashback beginning, that woman did not murder 9 women. Like, that person did not murder 9 people. And so it's like, oh, like, now we're gonna find out that she's actually framed for the crime and like see how that happened. And that was like a really kind of just amazing. Like if the episode was just that would already be like pretty impressive. But then we see what is probably one of the most extensive live action depictions of Arkham ever, I think, right? So she she gets taken
the systems of Arkham as opposed to just like sort of like, you know, shots of them talking to somebody in a jail cell. Like, that's about I think it's the longest we've spent inside Arkham Asylum for sure. Yeah.
So she's taken there and held there against her will for a very long time. And there's a lot of stuff that happens while she's at Arkham. She meets Magpie, her cellmate, who is a character from the comics. Had you heard of Magpie before, Patrick Klepek?
I don't think you should. Like, she's a very I looked her up after the episode, like a very minor character. Told.
The show is really putting in the minor characters into the background here. So Magpie, according to Wikipedia, is a jewel thief who specifically targets jewels named after birds and then replaces them with booby-trapped replicas. That is Magpie's deal.
I mean, the villain everyone is clamoring for to be in. I mean, look, I do appreciate when, like, for a show that, you know, changes Oz's name. Like, I think it's cool that they're like villains that otherwise like are never going to rise to being in a television show or a movie.
Sprinkling them in there, like some spices, basically.
Yes, and I do like when you kind of dig into the D tier of like one-off villains that have a little kitschy sort of calling card, like leaving booby-trapped birds that they steal.
Yeah,
that's great.
Also, her doctors are Dr. Ventress, who is another character. Floyd Ventress is another character who ends up becoming a character called Mirror Man.
Oh.
He's another kind of villain-esque character in the DC universe. But I don't think Floyd Ventress in the show is going to become Mirror Man. I think it's just like, here's a little Easter egg for those who are really into the comics. Anyway, and her other doctor is Julian Rush, who we met earlier in the show. I do want to acknowledge we got a YouTube comment at youtube.com/decodingtv. I had speculated maybe Julian Rush is the show's take on Jonathan Crane. But somebody else pointed out maybe it's the Mad Hatter. Whose real name in the DC universe, I believe, is Jarvis Tetch. So who knows what Julian Rush is or is not a reference to. They have changed the name so much that I can't even know what it's a reference to.
Right.
If it's even a reference to anything. Maybe it's just nothing, right? It's just a random dude's name that they made up.
It's a new version of an Easter egg. Are you even sure it's an Easter egg?
I mean, I wish the show didn't like. The thing is, the show has named like Floyd Ventress. That is a name from the comics, so it's like they're not against using the actual name sometimes. So maybe
they're just
Julian
more
Rush
selective. I feel like it's not. It's not the kind of show where in every scene, you're like,
every scene, right?
I have to scan the background because there's going to be like some reference to something there for like the diehards who can point at the screen. Like it's just not that kind of show.
Sophia doesn't have a good time with the other inmates, one of whom physically assaults her, and she's forced to do electroconvulsive therapy without any anesthesia. Overall, it's a horrifying descent into hell. There's a few other things that happen that are worth mentioning about this Arkham flashback. She ends up spending way longer there than she thought she would. She's declared unfit to stand trial. Like she thought she'd be there for like 6 months, then she'd go to the trial, but they declared her unfit. It really makes you understand, like, oh wow, somebody with power could really put someone in a hellish situation like this without any recourse. She kills Magpie, super angry at her own predicament. She kills Magpie. We do see Magpie eating the red drug stuff that they were trying to distribute in the previous episode. So like if you're good, apparently you get this like nice drug that subdues you. We see like Alberto visit her, and you really get more of a sense of who like Alberto was as a character, which is actually kind of nice because you only meet him for about like 30 seconds before he gets shot to death in the first episode. But this was a really just like a lot of Requiem for a Dream vibes in this sequence. A lot of just like, wow, this is a really horrifying situation. And you can imagine one of my favorite elements of the episode is, I once heard when I was studying psychology in college that like if you put an innocent person into like or somebody who has no psychological issues at all into this environment, that they would behave in such a way that confirms your biases about their having sort of psychological problems, right? And like she's like, no, I'm innocent, like, and she's like acting all crazed and stuff. It's like that's what a normal person in that situation would actually behave like. And I thought that was a very kind of poignant component to it. But Patrick Klepek, what do you think of kind of this whole sequence at Arkham Asylum?
Well, I think it's fascinating because at least in the television or theatrical depictions of Batman Gotham City, Arkham Asylum is always present, but it's not a place. It's just like in the sense like that
it's
we
like
go
a
to
concept,
visit,
right? Yeah.
And understand it's a location that Batman goes to like have a conversation with a supervillain, or it's where the people he captures, well, they go to Arkham Asylum. And, the classic sort of question about Batman and Gotham City and the world that Batman operates in is, does the sheer existence of Batman thus create supervillains? And thus Batman is really just making the problem worse by being a guy wearing a bat suit, encouraging other people to have exaggerated, sort of criminal, like exaggerated lifestyles. And what I'll be curious is like, is some of the groundwork that's being laid in this show by depicting Arkham Asylum to this degree and to kind of flesh out what it actually is doing to the people in it, is like, what is creating the rot in this world? Like Batman goes and collects somebody, doing something bad. And where does he send them? Well, he sends them to Arkham Asylum. Like that's not a place where they're getting better. That's not a place that's a place where a supervillain is just ratcheted up a couple of degrees. Or in the case here, if the show ends up being a secret reveal of a protracted origin story for a supervillain, whether they stick around in this show and beyond or only are in the Penguin and a foil for Oz. It really establishes Arkham Asylum as a fascinating piece in the overall puzzle, like what makes Gotham rotten. And it's like, well, there are these, and it overlaps with the like traditional gangster criminal elements that are always present in a lot of Batman stories, but really goes to show like you can take a broadly innocent person, ruin them, and then they go out and do tremendous harm once they are released. And that seems to have a lot, like that could have some real growth and exploration for like broader ramifications, like this interpretation of Batman and Gotham. And like, what are you doing out there, man? Like, are you actually making the world a better place when you're just sticking them in Arkham Asylum? And I think if that's one of the questions this version of Batman is asking, that starts to get at some really interesting ideas of how this world functions, operates, and its relationship with its like, supposed superhero.
I don't know if I think the show is that ambitious as kind of what you're laying out, but I do think you're making a great point about how an institution like this can actually shape someone who doesn't have any problems theoretically when they go into it, right? Another great kind of show that tackled this, also on HBO, also starring John Turturro, by the way, is The Night Of. I don't know if you watch that show, but basically that's a show about
Yes, tremendous show.
Yeah, somebody who's like goes to jail and is shaped by their experience, going to jail and or going to prison, I should say. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll kind of have some deeper social commentary.
I mean, Reeves has talked about one of the other shows he had was in development was an Arkham Asylum set show, and they've since abandoned that concept. It's become something else, yada yada. But all that goes to tell me, like, Reeves at the very least in this world, like whether it gets as ambitious as what I said, thinks of Arkham Asylum as a place, not a jail cell for supervillains. Or if it is, he's thinking on it on a deeper level than just, well, Batman caught him, off to Arkham Asylum they go. And like that it just makes this a more interesting, thoughtful playground for this world of Batman and Gotham City in a way that just suggests like other modes of storytelling and characters that we just haven't gotten before.
Totally fair. What I was amazed by is like how the show continued to like ratchet up the horrors. Like it starts with like, oh, the realization that she's going to be going to Arkham, and then like she's hosed down, and then she needs to deal with the other inmates, and that's challenging. And then she does the electroconvulsive therapy, which, by the way, in real life is not as painful as it is depicted. Like you're typically asleep and I think anesthetized, but like in the show, it's obviously like a horrifying experience. And so it just like horror upon horror compounds itself. What I was amazed by is just how many different locations there are. Like I said, this show looks expensive, but like this episode looked really expensive. They had to build out this whole like commissary or shoot on location there and shoot in her cell and all, the Arkham place where she's hosed down and the, all these all these different locations are just like, and the show's like, some of these scenes last like less than 5 minutes, and it's just like new location for you, and it's like, oh wow, this is just really makes you feel like this is a real place. To your point, Patrick, about like this being a physical, real place that has implications for the world.
Well, and this is one of those, this is a show that every episode you start it, and it's going to be some version of 58 minutes to an hour and 7 minutes, and I think it's done generally like a pretty good job of justifying that runtime. In general, I think shows do not justify that runtime. This is the kind of episode where it's really taking advantage of what does it mean to be in this situation with this character for a long, like you walk the path that she walks. Like, why, like the repetition, like there's a different version of the show where it's like, you see her locked away and it's the classic, like, no. And then like cut to 9 years later. And like, she comes out and like, I'm a little crazy because I was in, you know what I mean? Like there's a different, like it's a much more, it really indulges in the horror in a way that makes you feel unsettled. You are deeply sympathetic. And when you come out the other side to when she makes the choices that she does because of all of this, because you had to sit with it and because it was it grinds you down as an audience member with her in a way that leads you to such a like you're rooting for her to murder an entire room of like, of course, bad, like quote, bad people like in this world. Like she's suddenly a hero from her story by the end. And that's just a lot to accomplish in one episode of television. And it's just remarkable the degree that they're able to pull that off.
I agree. So, I mean, if the episode had just been the Arkham stuff, I would have been like, wow, what mind blowing. I can't believe she didn't do the murders. Like when she's first taken in by you find out like how Oz betrayed her, right? Like he told on her to her dad, and like that's what ended up getting her shipped to Arkham, and like you see the relationship, like they have a very cordial relationship, but then like she pulls rank on him, and it's like it becomes very uncomfortable. Like that whole dynamic is established really well, and then honestly, I was like in a state of shock when she woke up in the present day again. Like she wakes up in like Dr. Rush's office, right? And it took me like a good minute before I was like, oh right, like the show is taking place in present. Like, I was so engrossed in the Arkham stuff that I was like, oh right, we still have like the rest of the show to deal with. Oh, this is a show about the Penguin, right? I forgot about that.
Well, yeah, it was one of those episodes where I'm pausing and I'm like, oh shoot, 22 minutes left. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder what, like, because that was already a full meal right there of like the whole Arkham stuff and like how like, oh wow, like, and it's like does such a good job of explaining who the character is that we've seen for the first 3 episodes of the show. Like, oh yes, that character would act exactly like what we've seen that character act like because she's been through all these things.
And it's so much better. This is I know we're like going over a lot of this part, but like it comes at a perfect time in the show as well. Like this is like it doing like flashbacks can feel sort of cheap and like sort of arbitrary. Like here, I think comes at a perfect time in her relationship with Oz and what we know and have assumed about the character, that it's just a perfect opportunity for them to kind of pull the rug out from under you in a way that doesn't feel like a trick. Doesn't feel cheap. It feels like now we have a full sense of who this person is that sets up the second half of this season of the show in a way that we're fully informed on like who they are, but not on what they're going to do in a way that is like really exciting.
So Sophia wakes up in the present day and she confronts Dr. Rush about abandoning her because Dr. Rush like apparently left the asylum shortly afterwards, while still being seemingly romantically fascinated with her to some degree. Like it's hinted at. I don't think anything really ever happened is kind of my sense that I got from that. Patrick, I don't know if you had a different reaction.
No, but I think she understands that he has a deep infatuation.
Yeah, he's kind of like infatuated with her a little bit. Anyway, and that's why he's kind of helping her or whatever. But anyway, seeing the situation she's in, she decides to take matters into her own hands. She returns to the Falcone family compound and makes a speech about how she's turning over a new leaf. She offers a toast, Cent'anni, the title of the episode, which means to the next 100 years, I believe is what that means. And then she proceeds to poison and murder virtually everyone in the house. I think with 2 exceptions, her niece and Johnny Vitti, who she confronts at the very end of the episode. I think that's her niece. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway. Wow.
Yeah.
And I had the same feeling again where I'm watching the show and I'm like, is this show really doing this? Like I had that feeling 3 times this episode, right? Time number 1 when I'm like, oh, is she didn't do the murders? You know, like, and then it's like, oh, we're going to Arkham. We're going to spend like 30 minutes at Arkham, you know, like, and then finally,
now we're going to do the murders?
Because there's always this doubt about like whether these characters are actually dead. Like maybe she like knocked them out and we're going to see them wake up later. Or
this dead,
and it's like the show removed. They are freaking dead. They dead. They did, because you see them like splayed out, their eyes are open, they're completely motionless. They did, and I'm watching. I'm like, oh, really? Like the 8 characters we met the first like 3 episodes. You're just they're all dead. They're just killing them all right away. Like
characters that very much seem like if you were to like ask me like before the episode, before I know anything that happens, like, hey,
right.
rank characters that you think are going to be around for the rest of the season. There's a handful at that dinner table. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like these obviously seem like the mid-level
Luca.
boss. Yeah, like they're going to be around till the end of the season, of course.
I think Luca is the boss, right? And so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I definitely assume he's going to be around.
Yeah.
And like one of Johnny V, like the guy sitting next to Johnny Vitti, like that guy is like, oh, he's seems like he's important. I don't know his name or what his rank is in the
But the
organization.
show, like, he gets enough talking lines.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you're like, clearly you're going to be around.
Clearly he's going to be around. And then for the show, you just like for her to just murder them all. Now, I think the flashback does a good job of setting up that basically everybody wrote letters against her to the judge.
Yes.
Like her entire family basically betrayed her. Now, you know, I think probably her dad was very convincing. Like her dad was like, you need to do this because it's for her own good. And by the way, if you don't, I'm going to kill you. Right. Like, so they were probably
But upon her return, it's not like there was a whole lot of remorse and like, hey, like her father's gone now. Like there, you know, if you wanted to, like, you could pull an Oz, right? Like you could say like, hey, that was like messed up what happened. Like,
yeah,
how do we make?
But that would have not
mm-hmm.
served the plot of the show, where we are not supposed to have any inkling that she didn't do the murders until this episode. You know,
right? Right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure people will say like, oh, I called it, and yeah, that's fine. You're very good at predicting things, but like, I think the show has done things to hold that knowledge from you. And if somebody was like, oh, by the way, I'm so sorry, I lied on that letter to the judge about how you killed people. You know, that would be like, oh, that kind of gives away the game right there, right? So
sure.
Anyway, but yeah, the whole sequence is iconic. There's a song that plays. I think it's "So Long, My Love" by Sarah Vaughan that plays, if I recall correctly. Anyway, and she's in this like revenge dress, walking around the house in a gas mask. Like that's just an incredible visual. Incredible visual. Looks amazing. Completely badass. And then they show exactly how it's done. She like, I guess, hooked the one pipe up to the other. The one pipe with the bad gases up to the pipe with the good gases.
Don't worry about it, Dave. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And then she goes around and you see like everyone is dead. Everyone at the dinner is dead. Except for Johnny Vitti. Now, why she kept Johnny Vitti alive, unclear. She probably needs at least one person to help her take over the empire.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just incredible where like the whole episode I'm guessing what is happening. I can't believe we're actually doing this. Oh, I can't believe they did it. Amazing visuals, amazing moments, everything I want a TV episode to be. One of the reasons I started, a podcast like this with Joanna Robinson, to be able to talk about moments like this on a podcast. This is like that type of episode. Patrick Klepek, any other thoughts on Penguin episode 4?
What I have grown to continue to appreciate the show is that it is not precious about its storylines in the sense that like, oh, we're on to something. Like, let's just keep like we got so quickly to like Oz and her like getting together. They're great riffing off one each other, going on their little adventures, trying to set up selling this drug. I thought that's what the next couple episodes of this show are gonna be, and like that's a fun dynamic, and I'm excited to see that. And the show just whips it out the window as soon as it like the show is very quick to get to a place where those characters can do that. We get one episode where they do that, and then the show goes, F it, we're doing something else. And that's really confident storytelling to land on dynamics with your characters and your actors that lesser shows would spend much more time mining, maybe even to good effect, but it just makes me think you have something bigger in store. You have something smarter in store because you're not relying on that as a crutch. And instead, feels like you have the momentum and you want to take that someplace. And I'm just, at this point, I'm like, I guess I'm just along for the ride. And I want to see where this ends up because where they have set things, I feel like it's a coin flip on whether Oz even makes it out of this show. And if you had started at the beginning of the Penguin and said like, well, what do you think ends it here? It's like, oh, well, there'll be some sort of villain that sets up Oz with a power structure that makes him a major player in the next Batman film, because Matt Reeves has said this show will not be a requirement for watching, but you're going to get to the end of it and like, I can't wait for that next Batman movie. And now I think it's up in the air on where that lands. And that's pretty cool for like an in-between movies show to leave you in a place where like I'm not really sure where this ends up.
I agree. I mean, you've been saying how you hope the Penguin will be a supervillain origin story for Sofia, and I mean, I think it's a coin flip whether Sofia makes it out of this at this point.
I agree.
I mean, she's just murdered like 8 of the most powerful people in that crime.
Made a lot of villains. Made a lot of
enemies.
A lot of enemies. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what about all those people's like capos and stuff? Like they're going to be pissed probably. It's anyway. That's probably why she needs Vidi. Like she can't just like. It doesn't necessarily work like that. We just kill them and then you're good to go.
I assume she's going to blame this on Oz and the other family, and like that's going to set up some of the big opposing forces for
maybe
what happens next.
I don't know that the show is going to give us a really accurate depiction of how these crime families actually work, but you know.
How does gas work? How do crime families work? Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We got other things to deal with.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.